Hey, welcome back, everyone. So as you can see, I'm visiting my dad currently, but yeah, some big news tonight. I want to go over a bit of what's happening. Not too much into it, honestly, because there's not a ton of new stuff, but a bit more with the impeachment, where that's at. Some of what Trump is doing is pretty interesting. Basically, what the Trump team did is they put together a video that shows Democrats saying the exact words or similar words to what they're accusing Trump of saying. It's quite an interesting approach to dealing with the accusations he's facing. And it's bringing up the issue that, well, if they impeach Trump using this statement, actually a lot of them could be incriminating themselves based on the exact same type of language. Quite the interesting story. I'll be talking about that. Melania just launched her own new office as well. There's some new updates on Trump. I'm going to go into this. Now, folks, good seeing y'all here. And let's see, Liz Kim, how you doing? Let's see here. This is from Liz Sanchez. She said, hello from Miami, Florida. Good to see you there. Marie Pyle, hi, Josh. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, everyone, for being here. Yes, Patricia Pamel. Yeah, good seeing you, too. Thank you. Now, folks, as always, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. I'll try to get to them. First, though, I'm going to go over a few different news stories. So first off here, talk about what's happening with the impeachment. This is Epoch Times. Hey, Maggie from West Australia. Wow. Yeah, thanks for being here. All right, so this is Epoch Times. First off, it says hypocrisy. That's a quote. It says Trump team shows videos of Democrat lawmakers during impeachment trial. It says here, former President Donald Trump's legal team on Friday accused legislators of hypocrisy as they played lengthy video montages of elected officials speaking about committing assault against Trump, threatening his supporters, and backing protests last year that regularly turned violent. In other words, the things they're using to impeach Trump and the claims that they're trying to pin on Trump, even though it doesn't really hold up with Trump because it's a lot of selective editing, they themselves did. And they themselves did while you did have actual violent protests across the whole country. And within context, their statements actually were as they were presented as well. These were politicians calling for violence, calling about, committing assault against Trump, actually threatening Trump supporters and backing protests that did actually turn violent. And even when they knew they turned violent, still supporting them. Now, let's go a bit more into this. It says, going on the offense in their first day of presentations during Trump's second impeachment trial, the attorneys used a strategy pushed by many conservatives. Now, Michael van der Veen argued that Trump did not use any inciting language on January 6th before the Capitol breach, but that numerous members of Congress have. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, he says, quote, Nancy Pelosi herself, quote, said the 2016 election was hijacked, and right, going back to 2016, they're accusing Trump now of saying the same thing, right? But in 2020, noting that Nancy Pelosi herself said the 2016 election was hijacked and that Congress has a duty to protect our democracy. She also called the president an imposter and a traitor, and recently referred to our colleagues in the White House as the enemy within. In other words, the same thing they're trying to impeach Trump on right now. Some of the same types of statements they themselves have made. He continues, moreover, many Democrat politicians endorsed and encouraged the riots that destroyed vast swaths of American cities last summer. And he added, quote, when violent left-wing anarchists like Antifa, right, quote, conducted a sustained assault on the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon, Speaker Pelosi did not call it an insurrection. Instead, what did Pelosi say? Well, she called the federal law enforcement officers protecting the building stormtroopers. In other words, not only did she not condemn the rioters, which were violent, but she condemned instead the actual police who were guarding the building. She called them stormtroopers. Imagine if Trump, while the Capitol building was being breached, and notably as this happened, Trump actually tweeted out, be peaceful, and told people to go home, and Twitter deleted that tweet so people couldn't see it. He did it twice, and they deleted it both times. Imagine if instead of telling people to be peaceful and go home, Trump called the Capitol Police stormtroopers and refused to condemn the protests, which he did. Imagine if that happened. How would this have played out? How would this have been used? Well, Nancy Pelosi did that during the riots that took place in Portland, Oregon, right? Now, it continues, when violent mobs destroyed public property, she said, people will do what they do. Imagine if Trump said that. Imagine if, people broke into the Capitol building and actually they didn't really cause that much damage. And even the mainstream media has admitted this, right? Imagine if they burned down buildings. Imagine if, maybe not the Capitol building. Imagine if they walked around Washington and burned buildings down and beat people to death on the streets and attacked police officers much worse than they did on January 6th, to the point where he had random killings of police officers. Imagine if that happened and Trump came out and said, people will do what they do. That was Nancy Pelosi's statement. Now, continuing on this. Now, rioters, some affiliated with anarcho-communist network Antifa and Black Lives Matter, ransacked stores across major U.S. cities last year and severely damaged government and civic buildings. David Scowen, another Trump lawyer, later played video clips of Pelosi and others making inflammatory comments. Now, in one instance in 2018, referring to anger over migrant children being separated from their parents, she told reporters, I just don't even know why there are uprisings all over the country. And maybe there will be when people realize that this is a policy that they defend. And she also said on multiple occasions, you have to be ready to throw a punch. Now, the comparison, of course, is they were accusing Trump of saying, you've got to fight like hell. But of course, if you watch the full clip of his speech on January 6th, which notably he gave while people were already breaching the building, meaning that the speech itself did not instigate that, right? He said, you've got to fight like hell. But again, if you watch the whole clip, he's very obviously referring to his legal team fighting in the courts. That was the context of the statement, which they removed. But Nancy Pelosi herself said, you've got to be ready to throw a punch, talking physically. And again, when she talks here, I'm sure everyone's heard about the kids in cages, and everyone's probably seen the pictures. First off, the media, the kids in cages pictures, the original ones that came out, were actually from a protest. They were not actually of, holding facilities. First off, right? Second off, that policy of, kids in cages, that was an Obama policy, and one that Biden is continuing now, right? And in addition to this, it's important to note, why did they have the policy of separating kids from their parents? The issue that, of course, caused so much problems around, really the U.S. And I mean, rightfully so, if kids were being separated from their parents forcefully by law enforcement. Well, first off, if a father was arrested for domestic violence and the mother's arrested as well, yes, the kid's going to be separated. If people commit a crime, typically they are separated. And that's to prevent them from being abused within the jail cells and so on, right? Because if you're arresting someone who is suspected of a crime, you can't put them together in a cell because you're concerned about their safety. That's normal way to deal with criminals. Of course, the narrative is different because if you have people coming into the United States illegally, right? Technically, it's a crime, but of course, it's seen as a humanitarian issue. But the real narrative with this actually isn't true. Do you know why they actually separate the kids from the people carrying them? It's because oftentimes the people with them are not their parents. The people with them are human traffickers, and they use these kids as like tokens to cross the border, and then they send them back and continue using them, which was why the Trump administration, when Trump was still in, started doing DNA tests on these individuals. Actually, Epoch Times, we had a lot of stories on this. A lot of those kids who were separated, not from their parents, right? That was the narrative. Not separated from their parents, but from the people trafficking them, right? Those were not their parents. Those were human traffickers who were using them as business pawns. And keep in mind, the entire system of illegal immigration, just getting briefly into this, is a business. It's a huge business. You're looking to pay, $40,000, $50,000 to human traffickers to come into the U.S. In some countries, you're looking to pay like India, for example, up to like $100,000. This is a very lucrative, illegal business that is encouraged by policy in the United States, and which is marketed in these countries as by U.S. policy. For example, like saying, you get free healthcare if you come to America illegally. It's used by these people, right? And oftentimes these people are abused. A huge number of women are sexually abused. A lot of people are sold into slavery. I'm sure a lot of you know that my reporting in the past has focused heavily on Chinese criminal organizations like the Tongs, not the Tongs so much, like the Triads, like the Chinese Mafia. One of the big human traffickers being the Purging gang, which in New York operates under the Fujian American Association openly. Oftentimes, people trafficked within those networks, not only are they abused during the whole process, but once they come to the United States, they're forced into sex slavery, and it happens openly in New York. You can see the massage parlors. You could see advertisements for this in newspapers before, like the Village Voice, openly done. And oftentimes they're enslaved in factories like sweatshops and so on as well, sometimes even Chinese restaurants. This is a business. It abuses people, and separating people from their traffickers is protecting them. But again, we're seeing a lot of manipulation of imagery, manipulation of language in order to create scandal, to make the bad guys look like the good guys. And oftentimes that's how politics just happens to work, and media narrative, unfortunately, as well. But let's go deeper into this, right? Now, Pelosi's office didn't return an inquiry. She did not respond to these accusations of her comments. Representative Ayanna Pressley, a Democrat from Massachusetts, said now during a 2020 appearance on MSNBC, she said this: "There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there is unrest in our lives." Imagine if Trump said that. Imagine if you had the Capitol breach, because this was in the context of the riots where people were being murdered, people were having their businesses burned down, people were being physically beaten, threatened, attacked, and so on. Imagine if Trump came out if this was happening, it was Trump supporters doing it, and Trump said, in response to violent protests and arson and people having their businesses destroyed and people being threatened with death and officers being randomly attacked and killed on the streets, and he said, "There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there is unrest in our lives." Imagine if he said that. Well, Representative Ayanna Pressley did in fact say that. Now, Vice President Kamala Harris, current vice president now, encouraged people to donate to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which bailed out defendants charged with murder, violent felonies, and sex crimes. And President Joe Biden spoke to crowds on multiple occasions about beating Trump up, as did a number of senators. Scowen said the, quote, hatred and anger, again, this is Trump lawyer Scowen, said the, quote, hatred and anger shown in the clips led House impeachment managers to, quote, ignore their own words and actions and set a dangerous double standard. Now, the House managers spoke about rhetoric, about a constant drumbeat of heated language, he said, right? And he continued, quote, as I'm sure everyone watching expected. We need to show you some of their own words, he said, before showing more snippets like this. Now, managers argue that Trump's, quote, fight like hell exhortation, right, his statement, fight like hell, to supporters on January 6th was part of his inciting the storming of the U.S. Capitol. Scowen later showed how Democrat lawmakers have used similar language before, right? And he said this: every single one of you and every one of you, that's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. And he pointed to the senators and the managers. He said, it's a word people use, but please stop the hypocrisy. And did you tone down the rhetoric last summer when all this was happening? Did you condemn the rioters, or did you stand with Nancy Pelosi, who said, quote, people are going to do what they're going to do? Now, senators were murmuring throughout the montage, and some passed notes to each other. Representative Jamie Raskin, a Democrat, who saw himself on the screen objecting to the 2017 electoral votes, right? The Electoral College votes in 2017, took numerous notes while the videos played. Several Democrats smiled as clips of them were played, including Senator Richard Blumenthal. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse audibly laughed, while, again, Senator Amy Klobuchar was even seen rolling her eyes. Now, this is according to Blumenthal. He said afterwards, quote, "They're trying to draw a dangerous and distorted equivalence. I think it is plainly distraction from Donald Trump inviting the mob to Washington." And Senator Bob Casey, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, said, "I don't think the comparison is apt about public officials using the word fight," which is what they're accusing Trump of, using the word fight, because I think the public record is pretty substantial with example after example where the president encouraged violence, refusing to condemn it. When did Trump ever encourage violence? Even on January 6th, he told people to be peaceful, to march peacefully, and they removed his quote in their own videos. And then Twitter deleted his quotes on this twice, right? Twice they deleted it. All right, folks, let me go over a few questions, and then we'll go over a few other stories. This is from Joe Sis. You said, Joe S. Zoe S. I'm sorry. You said, "Is Parler ever going to come back up?" Well, Dan Bongino, who's one of the investors in Parler, again, this social media platform, independent, Dan Bongino said, it was either Sunday or late last week, said that Parler could be up by Monday. And of course, we're now on Friday, and so it wasn't back up. We've been hearing rumors about when it's going to come back up. We haven't seen anything on it. It's actually not clear what the context is of what's happening. Actually, there were a few different stories I wanted to get into with you all about what's been happening with Parler. The former Parler CEO, because as I mentioned before, they actually removed him as CEO, this Mr. Mates. He actually gave an interview with mainstream media where he suggested some of what may have happened. Where basically, well, with him being removed from his position at least, where he did suggest that Trump had been interested in investing in Parler, and he was afraid of that. He didn't seem to want that. He didn't seem to want that to happen. And maybe that's why, maybe I'm just speculating, maybe that's one of the reasons why they pushed him out, because, of course, other people on the team seem to favor Trump a lot more. And it seems to be the case that maybe the Trump team itself, they've suggested that Trump may start his own social media or get involved in another one. Maybe it'll be I'm just speculating, but maybe it'll be the case that if Trump doesn't start his own social media, maybe he's looking to invest in Parler and help him get set up again. All these are possible. This is from the one and only Pinky. And good seeing you here also. He said, "Joshua Philipp, Mike Lindell was at the White House the day before Trump left office. Do you think he was planning the documentary then?" And Mike Lindell did release a documentary about election interference. In fact, he did at least 2 parts now I've seen. And he continues, "So the Supreme Court could rule after the impeachment." That's an interesting speculation, actually, that Mike Lindell, of course, did make these 2 documentaries. It's not clear how long he was working on that for. They were long documentaries, over 2 hours, and they included a lot of interviews, meaning that, as a journalist, I can tell you that takes a lot of work. And so it is possible that he was working on this for a while. It's not clear how long. It'd be just speculation. Do you think he was planning the documentary while he was at the White House the day before Trump left? Now, I do have some information on that. You might remember that Mike Lindell was seen carrying the stack of papers. He was photographed carrying the stack of papers, and people noted that on the papers was written words. A reporter had taken a photograph of it, and they zoomed in. Were written words suggesting that Mike Lindell was going to visit Trump and calling for Trump to call in martial law. This was the wording on the piece of paper. A lot of media reported it. I actually called Mike Lindell, and he clarified in a phone call what happened. According to Mike Lindell, he said that he had a whole stack of papers. He said the document that mentioned martial law was handed to him by another individual who asked him to pass it to Trump. And he said that Mike Lindell said he hadn't read all these documents. Mike Lindell's personal information that he was passing to Trump, the main thing he was emphasizing was his own research. And actually, this does lend to your question. What Mike Lindell, in his own words in his phone call with me, said that his main purpose in meeting with Trump was to pass to him the research that he had financed to investigate election interference, which Mike Lindell later did use in his documentary. He said he was concerned because there was so much information coming out that Trump may have missed it. He noted, though, that his meeting with Trump was very brief. I think like 10 minutes. It wasn't long at all. And that Trump kind of looked at it and said, you're a few weeks too late, or a couple months too late, or something like that. Meaning that maybe had he gotten it to him a few weeks before, maybe it would have been used like that, but it's not too clear. In other words, and just to sum this up, yes, Mike Lindell did meet with Trump at the White House. Yes, he did hand them documents. And yes, some of the research he handed Trump was some of the key information that he later included in his documentary. And so possibly, it's not clear whether Mike Lindell intended that to be used in the Supreme Court hearing or in any way. This is from Dade Johnson. He said, Josh, any news from Walkaway with Brandon Straka? So you might have seen Brandon Straka, who was a Democrat and started the Walkaway movement. I've interviewed him. I've spoken with him before. He's a nice guy. At least in my encounters, he seems like a nice guy. He was actually arrested for his alleged role at the Capitol breach. Now he did not seem to have entered the Capitol building. He was outside the Capitol building, but he was accused of breaching it, and he was also accused of inciting people who were there. He was accused, for example, of encouraging people when they took a shield from a police officer. This is just pure, quotes and statements. It's not clear whether his calling for or encouraging people or saying good job essentially in any way had anything to do with that. But that's what he's being accused of. I haven't heard any updates yet on the trial that he's facing. We're not really going to know what happens to him until he actually stands trial. Last I heard, he had been arrested, and last I heard he was facing these charges. And it's ironic because, hypocritical, I should say, because at the same time that Brandon Straka has been arrested and didn't even enter the Capitol building, you have this Mr. Sullivan, who actually runs a Black Lives Matter affiliated organization, right? It is a radical far-left organization, and in his own admission has ties to Antifa, although he denies that he's a member. This individual was actually at the front lines, actually has documents of discussions he had on Discord chats and so on, basically about planning and incitement and so on. And he, of course, did get arrested, but he got let off with basically a slap on the wrist, and then violated his agreement to not be in prison, and the judge did not put him back in, essentially. Now, he's also still facing these charges. We'll have to see what happens with him. This is from Liz Love. Liz Lovegood. He said, Josh, do you think that Bill Gates buying a lot of farmland is connected to what China did with these stupid fools? I looked into it. One of you had mentioned a while back, and I did comment on it, that Bill Gates had bought up a bunch of land in the Midwest. Now, my first statement was, well, it's not unusual for billionaires to just buy a ton of land and be jerks with it. I mentioned that Mark Zuckerberg allegedly bought a ton of land in Hawaii, and there was a big standoff with the native Hawaiians because they were like, this is my ancestral land, and Mark Zuckerberg built fences around the whole thing since people were locked out of land. I think they came to an agreement eventually, but stuff like that does happen with some of these folks. But I looked into it, and you're right. Actually, not only did Bill Gates buy a lot of land, he bought farmland. And Bill Gates is now one of the biggest owners of farmland in the United States. One sec. Hey, my neighbor Bill, kapu aloha. Thank you. Yeah, aloha. Anyways, back to Bill Gates, though. Yeah, so Bill Gates he's now one of the biggest owners of American farmland. And this is concerning, in my opinion, because I'm personally not a fan of GMOs, genetically modified products. And Bill Gates, of course, being a technology guy and vaccine guy, he is into the cutting edge of science. Now, if he can use that land and create a monopoly, or again, because he's the biggest owner of this land now, if he can create a huge business that promotes and plants and basically creates a cheap market for GMO crops, and that becomes one of the biggest products in the country, or essentially when it comes to farmland, I would be concerned about that. It's not clear exactly why he's doing this, right? Of course, yeah, you mentioned we have plenty of GMOs. I understand some people are all for it. Personally, I don't like the idea of modifying nature like that. It seems creepy to me. I don't know. It's just my opinion. But yeah, it is concerning, I think, in terms of how he's going to change the farming industry, because why is a high-tech guy getting involved with farming, right? If not to do something innovative. And frankly, innovating with stuff like that is sometimes concerning to me in terms of what that could actually be when you're innovating, because again, that's usually GMOs, and I'm personally not a fan of that. We'll have to see what he actually does with it. There are some issues with some of these. There are some issues I very much dislike with GMOs, and also some of the products that are used, for example, for them. Things that, for example, mess up the soil, and you can only plant certain types of crops afterwards because you've messed up the soil. There are issues, for example, like plants fruit without seeds, and you can only imagine how that affects your health if you're eating essentially sterile foods. I don't like the idea, but we'll have to see what he does with it. Let's see. This is Pudgy Tummy. He said, Josh bought a My Pillow based on your review the other night. You're now officially an influencer. Oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear. Yeah. So just to be clear, Mike Lindell did not give me money for that endorsement, but yeah, I do use one of his pillows. I find them very comfortable. I do very much enjoy my pillow. Yeah. All right, last question. We'll go to some more news stories. This is from Jason Wahia. He said, "Evening, Joshua. I'm 18 years old, active duty." Oh, good stuff, man. You said, "What's your insight into this whole purging of the military of those whom are Trump supporters? Do you suspect eventually the scope to go as far as searching social media posts that may seem not in step with the far left agenda? Thanks and God blessings." Now, thank you. So the Biden administration, his new defense secretary, is interested in purging the U.S. military of what he considers white nationalist views or extremist views. And this, of course, started with Biden stating his concern about possible ideologies of the Secret Service. He was worried that some of these Secret Service members may be pro-Trump, which is concerning in itself, because if you're purging the Secret Service, if you don't trust the people assigned to guard you, it means you're distrusting basically the entire process of training and vetting these individuals. He was concerned that they were Trump supporters. And look, we're in a system of politics where people are allowed, and as part of our system of government, encouraged to vote for the person they want to lead this country and to vote for the people they choose as their leaders. If you are not allowed to vote, and if the person you voted for is then held against you, that is no longer a democratic election system, right? Or the election system of a constitutional republic. That is a tyranny. That is a one-party tyranny, where if you're not allowed to vote for someone, and if you're punished in your employment for voting for someone, that is no longer a system where you can have an election, right? Because you're punishing people for who they vote for. That's what that was the first step in that. The second step was then he was concerned about the ideologies of the National Guard, because they deployed 26,000 National Guard members in Washington, D.C. Seriously concerning. Now, I spoke with some individuals who, work in that area, and their big concern was this. They said, look, any National Guard member deployed to Washington for that type of guard duty, any of them, right, would have already been vetted in terms of having some degree of security clearance. To even have that position, you would need to have security clearance, meaning they would have already been vetted, meaning that they would have already had to have some type of clearance. And that clearance would oftentimes mean, first off, checking your background, second off, even doing lie detector tests, and so on. The only way, and this brings up the issue, if they already do all that, what more could you do, right? If these people were already approved, already vetted, already had clearances, what more could you do? And the only possible what more would be looking at their social media posts, would be searching their social media history and purging them, essentially, based on statements they had made. That is a very concerning development. And as I mentioned before, well, it's happening now. They're doing the same thing to the entire U.S. military now. They're now investigating the entire U.S. military for ideology, and they're framing it as supporting white nationalism. The problem is what constitutes white nationalism? Does it mean you're a member of the KKK? Does it mean you're a member of, some far-right nationalist movement? Probably not. The issue you have now is that the media framed Trump and Trump supporters as white nationalists. And the concern is that they're going to use the media definition of this that has been promoted over the past 4 years as a type of partisan political attack in order to purge people within our own military for engaging in the system of government that we have in this country, which is, as Americans, we are encouraged to vote for the person we choose to lead our country. And yes, there are people who are Democrats, and yes, there are people who are Republicans. And the concern is that if you voted Republican, that you would be branded as being a white nationalist. If, again, Trump supporters are branded as such, because they were branded like that by the media. This is the big concern. And the other big issue you have here, as I've mentioned, is that this looks a lot like what they do in China, where Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, demands ideological allegiance from the military. In other words, where does the allegiance of the military stand? Is the allegiance to the system, to the Constitution, as is the case in the United States, where our troops, right, our soldiers and Marines and airmen and National Guard members, that they swear an oath to protect the Constitution, right? And that is the way America's military functions. They are sworn to protect the Constitution. In other words, they're sworn to protect the foundational ideas of this country from enemies, both foreign and domestic. Domestic, right? In other words, people who would, damage the Constitution, the military is sworn to protect the average Americans against those people. And a domestic enemy can be a public figure. It can be a member in government office if they're seen to be basically undermining the Constitution or harming the Constitution. This is part of their oath. Police officers oftentimes swear the same oath, as do elected officials. Now, the concern is that if you purge people based on ideology, if you purge people based on who they voted for in a presidential election, or if you purge people for supporting the president of the United States, in this case, for example, which is the concern of what they're doing, then you no longer have a military that is like that. You then have a party military. You have a party military of a certain one type of person who support only one side of the country, and you've removed the rest. And when you do that, you no longer have the type of military that our system is based on. You no longer have a military that is a general military where people are allowed to vote and support whoever they choose, but are still sworn to uphold the foundations of the country. You then have a party military, just like they have in China. Because the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese military, is not sworn to protect the Chinese Constitution. It is not sworn to protect the Chinese people. It is not sworn to protect the ideas of the culture or what the Chinese people are. It is sworn to protect the Chinese Communist Party. It is a party military. And if you start purging our military based on party alignment, you're creating the same thing. That is the real big concern here, in my analysis at least. All right, folks, let's go over a few more stories. All right, this is another one on the impeachment. I think you'll find it interesting. All right. This is Epoch Times again. It says, woman claims Democratic impeachment managers falsified and misrepresented her tweet. It says here, House impeachment managers were accused of falsifying a tweet from a woman who said the managers included a blue check mark next to her name during a video presentation. Jennifer Lynn Lawrence, the woman whose tweets were included in the video, wrote on February 10th, I've never been verified on Twitter, so why did my tweet used in the fact-free impeachment include a verification badge? I'm assuming Democrats faked it, like they are faking the whole case. And then she continues, Representative Swalwell, why did you add a verified badge to my tweet in your presentation? And she was referring to Representative Eric Swalwell, a Democrat from California, who presented her tweet as evidence in the impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump in the Senate. And now, basically, and you can look at the tweet, someone put a blue check mark next to her name on Twitter, suggesting this was an influential and recognized account, meaning they would have more influence on Twitter, when in fact her account is not certified by Twitter. It does not have a blue check mark. Now, folks, in a normal trial, what do you call it when someone alters evidence, right? What do you call it when someone alters the evidence used in a trial? Normally, you would call this falsifying evidence. And what is that? That's a crime, right? Now, they have someone falsified evidence. Someone committed a crime. Can we now expect whoever falsified this evidence, either Representative Swalwell or someone in his team, could we accuse them of tampering evidence, of falsifying evidence? Yeah, you could accuse them of it. Will they face charges for this? At this point, probably not, but we'll have to see. But in normal situations, if we had functioning rule of law, someone would be facing investigations. Someone could face charges. And I guarantee you that if the tables were turned and Trump did that, they'd probably be trying to impeach him for that too. Right? Falsifying evidence. All right, let's go deeper into this. Now, a new update, something a little lighter now, right? Now, this is Epoch Times again. It says Melania Trump, right? Again, former First Lady Melania Trump announces a new personal office. She's announcing the creation of a personal office. It says here, First Lady Melania Trump on February 12th announced the creation of a personal office. And it says here on a verified Twitter account of the office of Melania Trump, quote, Mrs. Melania Trump is announcing the opening of the office of Melania Trump. Please follow this account for news and updates. Now, the message is the first public statement from the First Lady since she briefly addressed a farewell crowd during President Donald Trump's last day in office. She has also issued a lengthier pre-recorded farewell message on January 18th in a video posted on social media. Now, I won't go too deep into this, but it's interesting because she's doing the same thing that Donald Trump is doing, which is Trump announced an office of the former president, right? Trump announced his office of the former president, and Melania is now announcing the office of Melania Trump. Now, this is an interesting choice in words. They're not calling it the Trump Foundation or the Melania Trump Foundation. They're not calling it, fight back, with Trump or something like that, like a nonprofit. In other words, they're not naming it like a nonprofit. They're not naming it like a super PAC, like the Patriot Party. They're not naming it like a foundation. What are they naming their new offices like, these new movements like? They're naming them like presidential offices. And what's interesting here is that they're not calling it this, but essentially they're suggesting that they are maintaining a type of office. And it's very interesting because, as I've said, Trump, by a lot of Trump supporters, is and will be recognized as essentially the government in exile. And his choice to use office of the former president, and Melania now saying the office of Melania Trump, is actually playing on that perception. At the very least, it maintains that type of wording that would create that sense, right? Office of the former president, office of Melania Trump, meaning some level of authority as an office that they are holding. And what's Trump going to be doing? Trump is going to be using his new office of the former president for grassroots organization, community organization, and for different types of advocacy, possibly events, possibly starting up new businesses. They're suggesting possibly social media. Now, let me explain a bit about why this is interesting as well. What Trump is doing right now is the opposite of what we had before. Before, Trump really came into the system and, he was accused of this. People on the left didn't like him for this. People on the right loved him for this. He basically came in as a person promising to drain the swamp, to take the country back and give it back to the American people, as he said during his inauguration, right? To pass this country back to the American people. His entire goal during his 4 years in office was to change the power dynamics in this country, to remove power from those in power and give more power back to the average American, the average U.S. citizen, and to begin again favoring the interests of the American people over foreign interests and special interests. And many people who have that power, who saw their powers stripped from them in many regards, and who were exposed of really various forms of corruption, which many people in this country and around the world now, I think, deeply recognize, right? That angered a lot of people. But Trump at that time was basically coming in from the top as the president, and a lot of people didn't like him, right? Everybody he was going out against, which is what he was doing, hated him. They very much didn't like him. They had ongoing attempts to remove him from office, pretty much over his entire time in office, from the very get-go. In fact, even before the very get-go, they were trying to remove him and kick him out and so on. Now, what's interesting now is that Trump now is essentially going to be functioning in the way that his own words suggest, is basically like a government in exile. And how does a government in exile function differently? And he's not calling himself this, I should note. He's noting office of the former president. He's not saying he's government in exile, but by doing this, he's going to be playing this role. Now, how does a government in exile function differently from a government in office, right? First off, a government in office rules from the top down, right? They rule through legislation, they rule through policy, they rule through the system, right? Top down, trickle down, then affecting the people. Say government in exile works through the grassroots, through community organizing, through the culture and institutions in the country. Typically, this level of things is what impacts the actual culture of a society. This impacts people choosing to boycott. This impacts people choosing to protest. This impacts people choosing to, like Gandhi, peacefully protest, but to peacefully resist things that they don't agree with. Trump is now playing that role. Or at the very least, he's suggesting, and has made some statements on it, that through his office of the former president, he's going to be doing something very much like this. And now we see Melania doing something similar to this. We can wait. Now we'll have to wait to see what Trump actually does with this, but the current trajectory, I believe, is suggesting that after the impeachment, because he needs to deal with their attempts to impeach him, that after the impeachment, we're going to see this come up again, that Trump is going to probably engage with this. Maybe he'll do it at CPAC. CPAC is coming up in 2 weeks, this big conservative event they have usually in DC. It's in Florida this year. Actually, I'll be speaking there. I'll be doing a panel on China. It's going to be in 2 weeks in Florida. Now, typically Trump does speak at CPAC. It's not clear whether he's going to be speaking there now. Biden's trying to put a travel ban on Florida. Maybe these are related. But it's possible Trump could make his reemergence soon, because hopefully by then the impeachment will be over. We'll have to see what happens. Now, at the same time, right? At the same time, you, of course, also have Trump looking to get involved on the business side. There's been talk of him starting, for example, a media. There's been talk of him starting a social media. There's a talk of him doing events. And as I've stated, if he is going to be engaging on the grassroots, in order to do that, you need a platform and you need a place where people can organize. And the chance of Trump being able to use any big social media for that, like Facebook and their Facebook groups to organize events, I would argue the chances of that are very slim, meaning that even in order to do what he says he plans on doing, he needs a platform. And the question is now, does he create his own platform, or does he use one of the existing platforms like Gab or Parler, or does he create his own? We'll have to see what happens with it. All right. Let me go over a few quick updates, and then I'll go over some more questions. Real quick, this is Vanessa Ann. You said, very good stuff here. Thank you. You said the right seems to be less politically active compared to the left. Perhaps this will motivate a change. And yeah, it's true. Typically, by the very nature of conservatives tend to be more religious. They tend to have more traditional values. They tend to not be the go out and protest and burn down your city types, usually. And they typically don't be the types, they're not the types to go out and hold big protests. They tend to be more law-abiding just by the nature of what conservatism represents in terms of values. But if you had a community organizer behind them and actually getting them to protest and march and boycott, they would be a pretty powerful force, actually. Now, I'll go over a few quick news updates, and then we'll go into some more questions. First off, Biden is now talking about gun control. A lot of people were concerned that Biden is going to enact really harsh gun control laws, and well, he's come out now and basically said he's going to do this. It says here, White House reassures gun control groups it will fulfill ambitious gun control agenda. Let me go into this. It says here, with control of the House, Senate, and White House as a backdrop, Biden administration officials in their meeting with gun control advocates conveyed confidence through legislative and executive action that in the past had not gotten the votes, right? That had conveyed with confidence about enacting gun control legislation. So they're going to be doing now what they've been trying to do for a very long time because they have a supermajority. Says here, on Wednesday, domestic policy advisor Susan Rice and White House public engagement director and senior advisor Cedric Richmond held a virtual meeting with leaders of gun control groups, including Gifford's Everytown for Gun Safety, Moms Demand Action, and Brady, during which they discussed the gun violence in America. Now, Rice and Richmond told attendees that President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are ready to act to reduce gun violence and enact common sense gun laws. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters on Thursday that the Biden administration is moving forward with fulfilling its ambitious plan of increasing gun control in the near future. Now, folks, they don't believe that you should have a gun to protect yourself or your home. This is coming from people who now have, 10,000 armed soldiers around their home, right? Maybe Biden wants to start by demonstrating that guns are not needed for personal protection, and maybe he will dismiss the National Guard who are carrying rifles all around the White House and all around Washington, D.C. To demonstrate, I think, that guns are not necessary for personal safety. I think that would send a very strong message to the American people that you don't need guns in order to be safe. Why do you need a gun for personal protection, right? I would argue that they should, start by disarming their Secret Service members and disarming the troops all around the White House, and maybe send home the 10,000 troops who are guarding him, and maybe tear down the fences and the barbed wire as well. I think that would send a very powerful message demonstrating that you don't need guns to protect yourself. I think it only makes sense. What do y'all think? All right. On a more serious note, right? Realistically, now, even if they do try to enact these measures, very likely they're going to slow roll it because they don't want to do it. It's a frog in boiling water type thing. They're going to roll it out step by step, probably. They're talking, for example, about putting $200 taxes for every magazine you buy, for example. One thing you're going to see, though, is a lot of pushback from the sheriffs in different states. You're going to see, for example, sheriffs, in fact, like Riverside County in California, where the sheriff previously stated that they will not support gun control legislation. Because keep in mind, sheriffs across the United States, they're elected officials. And often, and again, they are sworn to protect the Constitution, and the Constitution guarantees Second Amendment rights. You're guaranteed to the rights to bear arms. And so many police, many sheriffs will refuse to support that. It's not to say it's going to be in every state, possibly in New York, for example. Oh, let's put it this way. In New York, it's already almost impossible to have a gun. I live in New York. I looked into legislation on this because I was looking to get a concealed carry. You can't get it in New York. You can, but it's very difficult. Now, on a funny note, I was like, oh, I can't get a concealed carry because they're crazy regulated. Maybe I can get like a black powder rifle. And I was going to get like 6 of them, like Blackbeard, you know? It's like, and apparently in New York, those are banned too. You can't own a black powder rifle. They're not regulated. They're heavily regulated in New York. And so I was like, oh, well, I can't get a black powder pistol. Maybe I'll get like a high powered BB gun. They actually have like hunting BB guns now. I don't know if you've all seen that. I was looking into these. In New York, those, and in most states, those are not regulated. You can buy a BB gun, right? You can buy high caliber BB guns these days, like 45, 50 caliber BB guns. It's crazy. You can hunt with them. I was looking into these. I was like, all right, maybe I'll get a BB gun, right? This was during the riots and stuff. I was like, geez, it's getting crazy, and police don't seem to be protecting people right now. And I looked into these. They're also banned in New York. They call them replica weapons. In New York, you can't even own a squirt gun that looks like a gun. They have regulations on squirt guns. They have to be like see-through plastic, and there's all kinds of other regulations on squirt guns. Possibly they'll try to use New York as the model for this across the whole country. You can still get guns, but it's very hard to get them. Now, folks are cracking me up. Now, again, we'll have to see how this works, because very likely what you're going to see is that some states are going to turn around and maybe sue or resist or refuse to support the legislation from the federal government, as we're seeing Texas right now doing on other areas, as we're seeing Florida right now doing in other areas. Let's see here. This is from Edward Halsey. He said, the interview with Daniel Miller by Joshua Philipp is why I just received my membership into the Texas nationalist movement. Yeah, that's right. I interviewed Daniel Miller, the head of the Texas nationalist movement. Those of you who didn't watch it, check it out. I think it was a good interview. He's a very interesting guy, actually. Let's see here. Let me go over just a couple more stories, and then we'll jump into some more of the questions. There's a few quick updates I want to get into tonight. Yeah, real fast. Path Traveler is saying, Josh, can you buy a boating flare gun? No, I don't think you can. If maybe you are. I didn't see the legislation on it, but in New York, anything that resembles a gun is regulated. If it resembles a gun, it is regulated. Which is how they've regulated BB guns and so on. For example, they call them replica weapons. Real quick now, another quick update. You might remember what happened with Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York. Now, speaking of New York, it says here 14 New York Democratic senators call for removal of Cuomo's emergency powers, and this is after a new report came out showing that Cuomo, someone within his office, intentionally covered up information on what they did with senior homes during the virus outbreak. Because what happened? Now, remember when everyone was getting all concerned about the virus last year, and Trump moved the military medical boat, right into the New York ports to help support New York because they were so worried about it? Remember how this was happening, right? Well, Cuomo never actually used that boat. What he did instead, he took people who had the virus and he sent them to senior homes. And a lot of people died because of that. A lot of people died because of that. It turns out now that in order to prevent investigations into how many people died because of his government policy, they covered up the issue, right? This is what happened. Let's go into what's happening now on some of this. It says here, 14 Democratic state senators in New York issued a joint statement to call for the removal of Governor Andrew Cuomo's emergency powers. They're calling for his emergency powers to be removed, not for him to be removed. Right after a report revealed that his administration allegedly covered up nursing home death data and apologized to state Democratic lawmakers in a private conference call. And the lawmakers said, these 14 lawmakers, while COVID-19 has tested the limits of our people and state and early during the pandemic required the government to restructure decision-making to render rapid, necessary public health judgments, it is clear that the expanded emergency powers granted to the governor are no longer appropriate. While the executive's authority to issue directives is due to expire on April 30th, we urge the Senate to advance and adopt to repeal as expeditiously as possible. Now, a report from the New York Post, which included audio, revealed that Secretary to the Governor Melissa DeRosa allegedly told Democratic lawmakers that Cuomo's administration withheld the nursing home death toll figures because it might be, quote, used against us by the Trump administration's Department of Justice. Now, this is important. What you often have with government is what you call crisis control. When an incident happens, you have a response. Sometimes that response could be a big media getting the early breaking story where they then frame the narrative and choose to omit or downplay the most serious parts within that. It's to mitigate the impact of a crisis, right? Now, what these lawmakers are doing, they're calling for the removal of Cuomo's his emergency powers, which he's already set to lose on April 30th. In other words, it is of very little consequence for committing what is essentially an intentional cover-up of what is essentially manslaughter. They were concerned, not that Cuomo, right? This is the nature of it, according to this audio recording. They were concerned, not that Cuomo would lose his emergency powers. They were concerned that the Department of Justice would go against them. In other words, a crime may have been committed. And so what they're talking about doing, even though it seems like they're having actions against Cuomo, they're looking to do a little tap on the wrist, right? Removing powers that he's already set to lose on April 30th, right? Little tap on the wrist for what is essentially manslaughter, possibly. And we'll have to see what happens with this as evidence comes out, right? Now, they continue. When they learned about the investigation, we froze, according to DeRosa. And she said, so we do apologize. And she added, according to New York Post, I do understand that you were put in that political position with the Republicans. Now, DeRosa on Friday morning said her remarks that were published in the New York Post were explaining that when we received the DOJ inquiry, the Department of Justice inquiry, we needed to temporarily set aside the legislature's request to deal with the federal request first. And she added, quote, we informed the houses of this at the time. And DeRosa added, quote, as I said in a call with legislators, we could not fulfill the request as quickly as anyone would have liked, but we are committed to being better partners going forward as we share the same goal of keeping New Yorkers as healthy as possible during the pandemic. Now, we won't go too deep into this, but late last month, New York Attorney General Letitia James published a report saying that New York state officials may have underreported state nursing home deaths by as much as 50%. In other words, there was a cover-up of the deaths in nursing homes. And again, a big part of the reason for that was they were taking people who had the virus. And instead of sending them to the ship that Trump moved to New York ports specifically to treat people with the virus, they chose to send them to nursing homes. And of course, elderly being more susceptible to the virus, a lot of them died. And what do? Rather than own it, rather than admit it, rather than deal with the issue, they covered it up by a factor of up to 50%. And what does it mean when you have an interest in hiding numbers like that, right? That is where you get to the issue of a cover-up. That is where you get to the issue of you trying to remove evidence of a crime that you may have committed. And this is where things are at, right? We'll have to see what happens with it, but we'll have to see what comes out in terms of where this goes. All right, folks. Let me go over a few questions and then we'll call it a night. Let's see here. This is from Olivia Gonzalez. You say, hey, Joshua, do you think SolarWinds, who hacked the water reservoir in Florida just as they hacked the Treasury, FBI, and other government agencies, and do you think this water hack is what we've been hearing about for years that China could use as another weapon just as they used the virus? So someone tried to hack the water system in Florida, and I heard as well that someone tried to do the same thing in Texas. Now, it's unclear what the motivation for this is, right? Talking about SolarWinds. It's unclear what the motivation for this was, and things are still being investigated. We'll have to see what comes out with it. But here's an interesting thing with this. How many of you remember, I mean, this is Cold War era stuff, but how many of you remember what came out in the admissions of arrested Soviet defectors who were talking about what the jobs were of sleeper agents? In other words, agents of a foreign country planted in countries like the United States with the intention of carrying out operations if there were to be a conflict between the two countries. Now, these individuals noted two things. They said the Soviet Union had two different policies, two different orders they were supposed to carry out. One group was supposed to poison the water supply, and another group was supposed to destroy the electric grid. And so the Soviet strategy, according to accusations, right? According to accusations, the Soviet strategy for their sleeper agents of the Soviet Union who were in the United States, right, had two different orders: poison the water supply, destroy the power grid. Now, it never happened, of course, and so some people say, well, nothing ever came out of it, but that was the allegation. The Chinese Communist Party has, not only the same systems the Soviets built, including sleeper agents, they have a whole lot more of them, including, for example, through the United Front Work Department and the organizations tied to it, right? But also they borrowed a lot of their strategies from the Soviets. And so it is, we can't say what actually happened here, but it is possible this was the case. I saw some of you joking. Yeah. It reminds me of Dr. Strangelove, where, the general's with the officer and he's saying, I don't drink water. Do you not know what I drink? Right? Fire water. Anyways, it's not clear what the intention was of this, but you do have operations like this. These things do happen. Let's see here. This is from Joshua Mavis. He said, my Epoch Times newspaper hasn't shown up in 3 weeks, even though my membership is paid up. Annoying. Sorry to hear. If you have a subscription to the Epoch Times and you haven't gotten it, please contact customer service. They are usually very fast to respond to that. And if you're having issues with that, please check with them. Yeah. And they said if you have just for this individual, if you did sign up for a subscription, didn't get it, just leave your contacts. Leave your contacts in an email, or just contact customer service. This is from Last Name. You said, Josh, is it true Linwood filed a hearing against Justice Roberts for pedophilia, child trafficking? I didn't see if Linwood actually filed a hearing against him, but Linwood did state allegations that Justice Roberts was involved in pedophilia and child trafficking. He did accuse him of that. I'm not sure if he ever filed a lawsuit or anything around it. Let's see. This is from Beth Dineros. He said, are you traveling to cover the impeachment hearings? Currently, I am not. Epoch Times, we do have reporters in Washington. One issue we have is that it's not clear how much access we're going to have with the Biden administration. We'll have to see. We are covering it. I'm not planning on going there unless something big happens. We'll have to see. That said, though, I am going to be in Florida speaking at CPAC. I'm going to be speaking on a China panel in a couple weeks. So if anyone's at CPAC, come say hi. I'm going to have a booth there doing interviews. So I will be in Florida. All right, folks, it's getting quite late, so I'm going to call it a night. Real quick, though, big update. So I've been mentioning for a while that I'm going to start doing this special series, and the plan right now is I've been talking about this communism series for a while. I want to do several things like this. I want to do a series explaining the real history of communism. I want to do a series talking about the ideologies of communist systems as they manifest within ideologies and systems we have today, including in a lot of areas people might not really know about. I want to do something to talk about the values in this country that are under assault, similar to what was under the 1776 Project. And I want to do these high quality documentary level productions. Also, we have some pretty big stuff in the works, which I'll be announcing soon. But in the meantime, folks, I am going to reduce the number of lives I do each week so I can start focusing on this. And I'm sorry, I love doing the lives, but just in terms of timing, I looked at my calendar, I can't do both. And so I want to do these high quality productions. And so I'm going to reduce the lives to 3 times a week. And, we'll see what we can get in terms of these big high quality productions. But I want to do like TV quality, high quality, in-depth productions that actually, I think, have real lasting impact. And I'm really going to be dedicating a lot of my work to that. I'm going to be continuing doing the interviews, continuing traveling, continuing doing some features as we travel. I'm also going to be doing still the lives 3 nights a week. So please still tune in. But I also want to do these high quality documentaries that, again, I think have real important cultural impact that I think this country really needs, honestly. And I've been thinking, if I don't do it, who's going to do it, right? So folks, I'm going to be doing the lives now Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And so please still tune in for the lives Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And in the meantime, know that I'm putting together some high quality, in-depth coverage that I think is going to really, I'm hoping, benefit this country. All right, folks, as always, appreciate all of you. Very much appreciate your support. I always enjoy talking with y'all. I'll see you again Sunday night, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time, so please tune in. And as always, folks, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. This has been quite the week, not just for our nation, but for the show as well. Now, as I mentioned in a recent episode, we found out the same day as the inauguration that YouTube has completely demonetized us. Now, honestly, it was expected, given the current environment of censorship, but it's also quite the blow to us financially, at least for the time being. It's a difficult time for not just us, but for the nation as a whole. In Washington, 6 in the morning, the sky was still dark. News reports said that the National Guard would be leaving, but even by noon, we still saw them stationed on the streets. And I wondered whether this really will be the new norm for the United States, and whether the nation has reached a stage where every national event going forward will have security like this. Now, it's not just the past few days that have been hard for the country, but the last year especially. We've seen panic around the CCP virus, job losses, an economic nosedive that hit small businesses the hardest. And on top of this, we've seen riots sweep across the country that pitted citizens against the police. We've witnessed a political climate where the people of this country are being held to 2 different sets of laws. And we saw a difficult election where many serious questions were left unanswered. People are losing faith in the integrity of our systems of justice, in our systems of government, and even in our fellow countrymen. Now, I was reflecting on all this as I walked through Washington. It's been hard for me to watch this country, which I love so much, facing so much turmoil and division. And it's difficult to watch our rights of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and freedom of belief being targeted for attacks. It's hard to watch big businesses and the big corporate media working hand in hand with big government in these attacks. Now, it was while I was thinking about this that a man recognized me on the streets. He greeted me and thanked me for doing the show. I've always enjoyed meeting you all, but it was especially so this time. It reminded me how important independent media is during chaotic times like these. Now, I've always held that truth has the natural power to dispel lies, and so it's natural that those who lie have it in their interest to prevent truth from being spoken. It takes courage in times like these to stand up, as it takes a willingness to face criticism and attacks. But I also understand that taking up this mantle during this time is what myself and others are being asked to do. And I'll do everything I can to not let you down, and to do so calmly and with good reason. Now, I'm a big believer in finding opportunities in adversity. When one door closes, another opens. And I have faith that for those who stand with integrity, goodness will always prevail. The Epoch Times has been publishing for over 20 years, despite the Chinese Communist Party's best efforts to shut us down. They've gone after our funding sources, they've hacked our website, they've set our printers on fire, they've threatened our staff, and used every means they could to discredit us. And despite the world's second largest economy bearing down on us, we've never stopped publishing, and we never plan to do so. Now, you may be wondering how we've managed to survive all these years. Now, put simply, we've managed to survive because of you, because of loyal viewers and readers who support independent media. So thank you, genuinely. We couldn't have done it without you. And with that said, given that YouTube has demonetized us, if you want to support us, please consider donating to us on DonorBox, which you can find linked in the description below. And going forward, I plan to continue presenting an accurate picture of the news, including here in the United States. I also plan to continue my work exposing the subversive programs of the Chinese Communist Party, which I think will only become more serious. And I plan also to help expose the forms that socialism is now taking in this country and around the world, while also helping to keep alive the values and traditions that are now under assault. That said, folks, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your support. And while it's possible we may move to another platform, these current attacks will not stop us from speaking the truth. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.